Good morning, guys. In the last class, we discussed that what is JWT, why we need to go for JWT, and how to secure our applications by using JWT tokens. So, as discussed, JWT stands for JSON Web Token, which is the most famous mechanism in order to secure our applications in the real time. Okay, so if here assume that there is a client application called Angular and provider application is called Spring Boot. In our Spring Boot application, there are several methods available. In order to access those methods, JWT token is required. So Angular application will send authentication request for the backend application with username and password. The backend application will validate that username and password is valid or not. If that username and password is valid, then it will generate a token for the user and will send that token to the Angular. That Angular or React applications will maintain a session and will store that token in the session. And for every next request, they will send the token, that is a bearer token in the request header. In the Spring Boot, that token will be validated by using a filter, once per request filter. For every request, that filter will be executed. If the token is valid, then the security context will be updated, then the request will be processed. Otherwise, that request will not be processed. So this is the implementation that we have done. So here JWT service class we created and app filter we created. JWT service class contains the logic to generate the token and to validate the token. And the app filter contains the logic to check the token is coming in the request header or not. If the token is coming, then whether it is a valid token or not, we will validate, we will verify. If it is valid, then security context we will update to process the request. So that is the implementation we have done, and we have tested that application also in the yesterday session. That JWT token contains three parts. Every part is separated by dot. First part is called header. Second part is called payload. Third part is called as signature. So the code is available in GitHub repository. Token generation, token validation, security filter chain also we have. Okay, fine. If you have one Spring Boot application, this JWT token security we have implemented. For example, if we have microservices based application, then what is the approach that we need to follow in order to secure our applications? When we have the microservices, how the security will be implemented by using JWT in the microservices? How the security will be implemented in the JWT by using microservices? So when I say microservices, multiple applications will be available. Okay, so assume that we are having one application that is called Greet API. One microservice is available with a name called Greet API. Okay, and there is another microservice is available which is called Welcome API. Two microservices I'm taking. One is Greet API and another one is Welcome API. Then there is another microservice is available, Authentication API. User login, user registration will be available in the Authentication API. This Authentication API is communicated with the database also. This Authentication API will communicate with the DB in order to validate the user registration and user login will be available in the database. So once the authentication is completed successfully, the same authentication API is going to communicate with the JWT also. Okay. Authentication API will communicate with the JWT and will generate the JWT token. And for all these APIs, we are going to have API gateway. Okay, when we are going for the microservices, all the backend APIs will be registered with the API gateway. So that whenever the request comes to the API gateway, that API gateway will validate that request and the API gateway will forward the request to the backend API. So in this API gateway, we will be having routings. Okay, which request should go to which which API in the backend that will be implemented as part of routings. Along with the routings, in this API gateway, we will be having a filter. That filter is used to validate the request. Filter will be available. That filter is used to validate the request. So what kind of validation will be there in the filter? Filter is going to verify the JWT token is valid or not. Okay, so this is our microservices application which contains JWT security. So what is there here? Greet API is available, which contains a URL pattern called /greet is available. Greet API available, which contains URL pattern called /greet. And there is a welcome API is available, which contains the URL as /welcome. /greet is available and /welcome is available as a URL pattern for the greet API and welcome API. So here authentication API is available /authenticate /log registration and /login URL patterns are available. So first, for this authentication API, authenticate method, security is not required. Anybody can register and anybody can log in. If they want to access Greet API or Welcome API, JWT tokens, security is required. Now, where we are managing that security? The security will be managed in the API gateway. So, API gateway will get a request. API gateway will get the request. If the request is coming from, if the request is coming to the API gateway, and if the request is coming for auth API, then we will allow. Anybody can register and anybody can log in by using this auth API. When they register, their record will be inserted into our database table. Customer can register in our application. So to register, there is no need of security. Anybody can create the account in our system. So to create the account in our system, the functionality is available in the authentication API. Okay. Come on, guys. So authentication API is available. Authenticate API is available. /register /authenticate is available here. Whenever the customer send a request to the API gateway without any security, the request will be routed to auth API because anybody can register and anybody can log in. When the customer registered in our application, customer record will be inserted into database table with password encryption. When a customer login, authentication will happen. If authentication is successful, for that customer, JWT token will be generated. That JWT token, we will send it to the customer as a response. Are you guys clear with this implementation? This is what we have done in the yesterday's session. Whatever the project we have developed yesterday, that project is called authentication API. So user can register and user can log in. When user is registered, user record will be inserted into database table. When user is logged in, that means when user is authenticated, then that authentication will be validated. If authentication is successful, then JWT token will be generated for the user. So are you guys able to understand the flow of this auth API? Guys, come on. Are you able to understand the flow of the auth API? What we developed in the yesterday session, that is the authentication API in the today's class. Yesterday, we developed one single project, guys. So yesterday we created one single project. In that single project, we have added 3 methods. What are the 3 methods available? One method is registration, another one method is login, another method is welcome. Login and registration, anybody can access. To access the welcome method, that token is required. Now that is with respect to single project JWT implementation. But in the interview, they will ask a question, how do you secure microservices by using JWT? So that is what we are going to see today. Now, when we are having the microservices, now you see Greet API is available, Welcome API is available, and Authentication API is available, and API gateway is also available, and service registry also will be available for our application. What is the role of the service registry in our application? Service registry is going to register all the services which are there in our application. service registry will be available, which is used to register all the services available in our application. So which we can call it as a service discovery. We can also call this as a service discovery. Okay. So greet API, welcome API, auth API, and API gateway. This is our microservices architecture. So in order to access greet API and welcome API, JWT token is required. Who is responsible to generate that JWT token? To generate the JWT token, authentication API is available. So what is the logic available in the authentication API? Authentication API contains functionality for user registration and user login with a MySQL database. Okay, so we are having authentication service in our microservices architecture. This authentication service contains functionality for register and login. So what will happen if user login successfully? When user is registered, then user record will be inserted into database table. When user register, then user record will be inserted into DB table. That is what we have done in the yesterday. Okay, when user login, then when user login successfully, then it will generate JWT token and send to user as a response. Okay, it is going to take care of the registration and it is going to take care of the login. Okay, fine. So when user register, record will be inserted into database table. When user login, authentication will happen. If authentication is successful, JWT token will be generated. JWT token will be sent to the client as a response. Then when client is accessing greet API or welcome API, then security is required. So where that security we implemented? Not in the greet API, not in the welcome API, because today I have 2 microservices, but in the real time 100 microservices can be available. So we can't implement security at all the 100 microservices. What is the common point for all the microservices? What is the entry point for the microservices? The entry point for the microservices is API gateway. The entry point for the microservice is API gateway. So in the API gateway, we are going to write the logic to validate the token. So in the yesterday project, token generation, token logic is available in one project. But today, we are going to separate that logic. Token generation will happen in the authentication API. Token validation will happen at the API gateway. That's it. Are you guys able to understand? Are you able to understand what is the difference between yesterday's project and today's project? In the yesterday project, here we have one service in the yesterday project. In this one service, we have register method. Okay, we have login method, we have register method, we have login method, and we have welcome method. And this is communicated with the database, and it is communicated with the JWT. It is communicated with the filter also. So this is communicated with the DB, and it is communicated with the JWT, and it is communicated with the filter also. So when user register, it will go to the database, and when user login, it will generate the JWT. When user access this, filter will execute to validate. So one project contains everything in the yesterday session. Whatever the REST API is available that we developed yesterday, it is having registration, login, welcome. For register and login, security not required. Only for the welcome, security required. So when user register, record will be inserted into database. When user login, it will generate the token, send the token as a response to the client. When user access welcome, filter will execute to validate the token. If you have single REST API, this is the process we are going to follow to secure it. But suppose when we are working with microservices architecture, multiple APIs available. Greet API, welcome API, auth API. So in the auth API, what we are doing? So database integration for registration and login, token generation. So this authentication API does not require any security. Anybody can register, anybody can log in. When a customer register, record will be inserted to database. When customer login, then JWT token will be generated. Now that token is required to access Greet API and Welcome API. Where we are going to validate the token validation we will do in the filter. Yesterday also we have done the same thing, but yesterday 3 logics we have kept in the single project. Today 2 logics I am keeping in the authentication API, filter logic I am keeping in the API gateway. So this is microservices security with the JWT. Are you able to understand the difference between yesterday logic is the same. There is nothing difference in the logic. Okay. So whatever we have developed yesterday, same logic will be available today. But the difference, yesterday, all 3 logics available in single project. That is single REST API, monolithic application. When you go for microservices, multiple APIs will be available. When we have the multiple APIs, where we should write the logic to secure the microservices? API gateway. API gateway will contain the filter to validate the token. Who is responsible to generate the token? Authentication API. For authentication API methods, security not required. For Greet API, Welcome API, security required. What kind of security? JWT. Where that token will be validated? API gateway will take care of validating the token. Are you guys able to understand? Theoretically, are you able to understand how to secure microservices in the real time? How people will secure microservices in the real time? Are you able to understand? I have given the code also yesterday. Git repository for the microservices security. I don't know how many of you gone through that. At least, did you complete yesterday project security with JWT? Did you complete yesterday project with security with JWT? Is my voice audible? Nobody is responding.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Did you guys try the yesterday's project? If you did not practice yesterday's project also, you will not understand. Yesterday we have done the implementation of JWT in our project. 3 functionalities we implemented in the single project, that is a monolithic. Securing monolithic application by using JWT. Today, securing microservices with the JWT. So can anybody tell me the difference between yesterday's project and today's project, guys? Can anyone tell me the difference between yesterday project and today's project? People are not responding. That means people did not practice it. If you practice, then you will speak confidently. If you are not speaking confidently, that means you have not practiced. Can anyone speak out? I want someone to explain me what is the difference between yesterday's project and today's project.
Yesterday we have implemented using monolithic architecture. Today we are going with microservice architectures.
Right. So did you practice yesterday's project JWT implementation in the Spring Boot? I have given the notes and I have given my code also. We have done in the class and I have given my code also. How many of you tried that project yesterday? JWT implementation. How many of you tried that JWT implementation in the yesterday session? How many of you tried? How many of you practiced Spring Boot with JWT application?
Yes, so Ashok, I have implemented a generation token generation, but need to complete validation. I mean, filter implementation is pending at my end, so I have to complete it.
Okay. Only one person?
I've done it, Ashok, Veda token or like
2 people? Rakesh and Sahil. What about other 40 people? Yesterday we spent almost 2 hours of time I have taken 2 hours class yesterday to explain what is JWT, how to implement JWT in the Spring Boot. Practically we have done and we have tested, and I have given one assignment also to analyze securing microservices with JWT. That code also I have given in the Git repository. How many of you tried these 2 projects? Monolithic application with JWT security, microservices with JWT security. Monolithic security and microservices security. Okay, if you are not interested, I can't do anything. Fine. So we need to understand how to secure the microservices by using JWT. So this is the project architecture that I'm going to demonstrate today, guys. So we have a service discovery. So we already know what is service discovery. Service discovery is used to identify what are the microservices available in our application. What is the name of the microservice? What is the URL of the microservice? What is the status of the microservice? We can understand by using this service discovery. And we have greet API, welcome API. These are the normal microservices. It is having one method called greet method. It is having another method called welcome method. And I want to secure these 2 microservices by using JWT. So in order to authenticate and register and authenticate the users, we are developing another microservice called auth microservice. So when user register, the record will be inserted into database table. When user login, a JWT token will be generated for the user, and the token we are sending as a response to the client. And these microservices user cannot access directly. For accessing these microservices, we are creating API gateway. So API gateway is going to act as a front gate for all the microservices. Any user who want to access our microservices, they should access API gateway. In our API gateway, routings will be available. In our API gateway, routings will be available and filters will be available. The routings are mainly used to identify which request should go to which microservice in the backend that we configure in the routings. And a filter is available. That filter is used to validate JWT token. That filter is used to validate the JWT token. If the token is valid, then only the request will be processed. If the token is invalid, then the request will not be processed. Good. So what we will do here? For the greet API, filter is required. For the welcome API, filter is required. For greet API, token should be validated. To access greet API, token validation is required in the API gateway. For the welcome API, token should be validated in the API gateway. But for the authentication API, filter is not required, because that is what I'm saying. Anybody can access registration and login. Okay. Once they registered, once they log in, once they get the token, with that token only they can access greet API, welcome API. That means, so there are 3 microservices in the backend: greet API, welcome API, authentication API. Out of these 3 microservices, security is required only for the greet API and welcome API with the JWT. For the authentication API, security is not required. That configuration I am going to do in the API gateway. Hey, API gateway, you need to validate the token when the request is coming for the greet and welcome. You no need to validate the token when the request is coming for authentication API. Okay, this project is already available in the Git repository, all the microservices. Let me show you this Git repository, guys. Authentication service already we implemented yesterday, same logic. User registration, user login, token generation. So only the thing which is new, the filter we need to create it to validate. Yesterday we created the filter also. But today the filter will go to the API gateway, and filter is applicable only for the greet API and welcome API. So this is our Git repository where all the microservices available. So if you observe, total there are 6 microservices are available. Service registry, config server, welcome, create, auth, API gateway. 6 microservices are available. Copy this Git repository and go to our folder. Let me clone my Git repository. Already we know what is API gateway, we know what is config server, we know what is service registry, what is authentication API. Only thing is how to configure this filter to secure only particular microservices. That is the new thing that I will do today. Now let me take this Git repository. Let me clone this Git repository, guys. Workspace, these projects are available. I'm cloning this separately here. Git bash. You can also clone this Git repository. Git to clone. Yeah. There are 6 microservices available. I'm cloning all these microservices. Microservices security. There are 6 projects available. I need to import these projects into my IDE and I need to run these projects and see how the microservices security is working. So let me go here. Let me take this as my workspace. Switch the workspace. Other. Yes. Microservices security workspace I'm taking. I will import all these projects and we will run and we will see whether they are working or not. All right, guys. I have my Git repository cloned. So I imported all these 6 projects into my Spring Toolsuite IDE. First, the project is missing. Okay. Let me open IntelliJ IDEA. Let me import the projects into IntelliJ and let me run this. File, open a project, guys. So let me go here. Microservices security service registry project I'm importing. Trust this project, open in the new window. Yes. So I opened this project, I'm loading this Maven project. It is going to download the required dependencies. pom.xml, Spring Boot 3.x version, service registry project we are taking. All right, now let me import other 6 projects also. File, file, open, other project, which is a config server project I'm importing in the new window. Every project we are importing in the new window. Then file, open, welcome API. I will trust this project and I will import this in the new window. Welcome API is imported. Then let me import next one, which is greet API. Trust this project and a new window. Okay, file, open, authentication service I'm importing, which is in the new window. So total 6 microservices are there in the backend. I'm importing all these microservices into my IDE. Then I will run these projects. All right. Now let me go to one by one now. First one is service registry. It is downloading the latest dependencies which are required for our application. So service registry is basically used to maintain the list of microservices which are available in our application. We are using enable Eureka server. Okay, so it is downloading the dependencies, guys. Once all the dependencies are downloaded, then we can start our applications. Config server is loading the config properties from here, which is running on the port number 1111. Okay, it is also downloading the required dependencies to start the application. Okay, enable config server, dependencies are downloading. Welcome API is available. So this is a normal Spring Boot application, which is going to run on the 2222. It is connected with the config server to load the configuration properties. And the next one, Greet API is available. So Greet API is also registered with the config server. It will run on the port number 3333. Okay. Then next one, we have another microservice called authentication service is available. The authentication service contains the logic to communicate with the database. So here I will give the database as SBMS45. The username of the database is root and the password of the database is root. Authentication API will run on the port number 4444. What is the entity is available here? User credential entity is available here. Okay. Good. Now, next one, we are having another API, which is called API gateway. So the API gateway contains the logic to secure the microservices, guys. This is the important part here. Okay. It will run on the port number 5555. In the API gateway, the filter is available, which is used to verify the token is valid or not. If the token is valid, then only it is going to process, otherwise it will not process. Authentication filter is available. So it will check the token is valid or not. If the token is valid, then the request will be processed. Otherwise, the request will not be processed. Okay, good. Now, let me go and run these applications, guys. Service registry. Still, it is downloading the dependencies. We should wait some time. All the 6 microservices I have imported.
So what is the difference between gateway filter and request filter?
Sorry, sir.
No, sir. What is the difference between the request filter and gateway filter in the gateway application?
Request filter, gateway filter.
This sir. In the filter. Can you open this? Yes, sir.
Request filter, which is used to validate the request. If any request which is coming, this is basically for UI integration I have implemented. Any request which is coming from the Angular, I want to enable the cross origin. That's why I have created the request filter, but I am not using that anywhere. It is just to allow the request which is coming from the Angular application.
Okay, sir. The main is the authentication filter only, right, sir?
The main authentication filter we are going to use now.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Sir, can you implement like a filter also? We have to extend like a gateway filter only, sir, in the authentication filter.
Fine, sir. Authentication filter, anything. Gateway filter factory we are extending here and we are checking that token is available or not.
Implements filter also fine, sir, here?
Yes, anything is fine.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, I think the dependencies are downloaded as expected, guys. Now we need to start this application and we need to verify it is working as expected or not. So first let me go with the service registry, which is the Eureka server application, which is running on the port number 8761. Default port number only we are using. Let me run this. The application is getting started. Eureka dashboard will be available. So we can access the Eureka dashboard and we can see 8761. Localhost colon 8761. Eureka dashboard is available. Currently, we don't have any clients registered with the Eureka, guys. Okay, the Eureka dashboard is empty, running on the port number 8761. Now, every microservice is dependent on config server now. So let me go to the config server and let me run the config server. Can anyone tell me what is the purpose of config server in the microservices? Can anyone tell me what is the purpose of config server in the microservices, guys?
So according to profile, we can load the particular property file, sir.
What is the purpose
Environment
of
related.
config server in the microservices?
It is used to make an application loosely coupled with the property file, sir.
It is used to load the properties from Git repository. Earlier, we used it to keep the properties within our application. If you keep the properties within our application, application will be tightly coupled. If you want to make any changes to the properties, then you need to recompile and you need to redeploy your application. So that's why we need to make our application loosely coupled with the properties. So to make our application loosely coupled with the properties, we are using config server. The properties loaded from the GitHub repository. Okay, my Eureka server is running on the port number 8761, guys. Whatever is there, the project here, Eureka server is available. That Eureka server will run on the port number 8761. That is a default port number we are using for Eureka server. Okay, then config server is also available where the configuration properties are available. So the config server we are running on the port number 1111. Let us run this config server. It will run on the port number 1111. Okay, so config server is available to load the configuration properties. This is config server. Greet API, welcome API. All these APIs are registered with the config server and they will load the configuration properties from the config server. That config server is running on the port number 1111. Running on the port number 1111. Right. So once the config server is ready, then next step, the next one that I am going to run, welcome API. Welcome API will run on the port number 2222. It is registered with the config server. It is registered with the config server. Go to this application and run this. Go to this application and run this. Now you can check in the Eureka dashboard that welcome API is registered or not. Welcome API should act as a client for the Eureka server. Refresh. I'm waiting for the welcome API to be up and running. Welcome API is started running with the port number 2222. Now you can see welcome API is registered with the Eureka. So the port number for welcome API is 2222. Then next one, I'm going to run greet API, guys. Okay. So this is my greet API. Greet API contains greet REST controller / greet URL is available. Welcome API contains welcome REST controller / welcome method is available. / greet method and / welcome method is available. And those messages are coming from the config server. Now, after this greet API is executed, we can check in the Eureka dashboard. Greet and welcome is registered with the Eureka server or not. Greet and welcome is registered with the Eureka server or not. We are going to verify. Yes. So you can see Greet API is registered with the Eureka running on the port number 3333. Welcome API registered with the Eureka running on the port number 2222. Okay. So it is running on the port number 3333 and welcome API running on the port number 2222. Then the next one, authentication API where the token will be generated. Authentication service is available. It will communicate with the database, guys. Let me open MySQL Workbench. So what is there in the authentication API? Whatever the logic we implemented yesterday. Okay. So auth config class will be available. We are using security filter chain and we are secure authentication config, enable web security, user detail service is available, and security filter chain we are customizing. Security filter chain we are customizing. We are allowing the request matches permit. So any request coming for register, for login, for validation, we need to allow the remaining things we need to secure. Password security encoder, authentication provider, authentication manager. So whatever we configured in the yesterday's class, same thing. Okay. So we need to import return http.csrf. What is the error here? Okay, it is saying that it is deprecated. Okay, fine. Let me go for customer user detail service. One bean is available and customer detail service loading the customer record based on the customer name, right? And customer entity is available. User credential entity, which is used to store the data. Filter is available, so we don't need this. Repository, credential repository, load the user record based on the username. REST controller is available. /register token means authentication token is available, and validate the token method is also available. Whether the token is valid or not, we can verify. So this is our authentication service, which is used to register the user as well as to validate the user. If the user is validated, then the token will be generated. Now let me go to my database. Use SBMS 45, show tables. Address, customer, employee, passport, person tables are available. Okay. Now let me run authentication service here. Application is there. Let me run this authentication service. REST controller, if you observe, what are the methods available? Authentication /auth /register /token /validate. There are three methods available: register, token, and auth methods are available. Any URL which is starting with auth, that is belongs to authentication API. Authentication service we are starting. It will run on port number 4444, guys. Authentication API will run on the port number 4444. It will register with the Eureka as a client. Okay. Welcome API running on 2222. Greet API running on 3333. Authentication API running on 4444. Refresh this. Now let us verify auth API is registered with Eureka or not. So auth API is started. Eureka registry, YML file, auth service, data source properties, DDL, application started. Authentication API started this application, port number 4444. Refresh Eureka dashboard. Yes. Authentication service also registered with the Eureka server. Greet API, welcome API, authentication API is available. Then the next most important part here, API gateway. So in the API gateway, we need to understand the YML file, guys, which is very important. So whenever a request comes to the /welcome, then authentication filter will execute. Okay. And whenever a request comes with the /greet, then also authentication filter will execute. Whenever the request comes with the authentication, that filter will not execute. So that is what I told you. When the request comes to the greet API, then the filter will execute. When the request comes to the welcome API, filter will execute. When the request comes to the authentication API, filter will not execute. What is that filter? So what is the configuration we are doing in the YML file here? In the API gateway YML file, the configuration is, if any request comes to /welcome, then authentication filter should be executed. What is the logic available in the authentication filter? My authentication filter contains the logic to validate the token. So yesterday we have seen how to read the token starting with the bearer to the substring of the token, get the from the seventh character, get the token data, then validate the token. If the token is valid, then the request will be processed. If the token is not valid, then the request will not be processed. So for which request the token validation is required? If the request is coming to the greet API, welcome API, then only this filter, authentication filter should execute. If the request is coming to the auth service, then that filter should not be executed. Anybody can access auth service. If you see, if the URL is starting with auth, directly sent to auth service, no need of any token. But if the request is coming with the greeter, go to authentication filter and validate the token. If the request is coming to the welcome, then execute the filter and validate the token. Okay, auth service is running. Refresh. Auth service is running on the 4444. Greet running on 3333. Welcome running on 2222. Then next what we are going to do? Run the API gateway. So in the API gateway, we have mapped these properties. YML properties are available here. Now let me go to this and see API gateway, which will run on 5555. So in the API gateway routings, we are telling for which URL pattern authentication filter should execute, for which URL pattern authentication filter no need to execute. For which URL pattern authentication filter should execute, for which URL pattern authentication filter no need to execute, that we are going to specify. All right, refresh this. Yes, API gateway is running with the port number 5555. Now let me go to Postman and let me check it. I will try to access the greet API directly from the API gateway. API gateway running on the port number 5555. So now in order to access the welcome API or greet API, we have the API gateway. Now let me try to access this API gateway project and see without token, if I access the API gateway for the greet and welcome, then what will happen? As per the configuration in the API gateway YML, if the request is coming to the /welcome, then it should go to welcome API. Okay, let's try to check this by using Postman. Yeah, I opened my Postman tool and let's verify this. Get request localhost colon 5555/welcome. 5555/welcome token, no token I am sending. Click on send request. Now, am I able to access that or I'm not able to access that? By using API gateway port number, I'm trying to access welcome. In the API gateway, routing is available. What is the routing in the API gateway? If any request comes to /welcome, API gateway running on 5555. If any request comes to /welcome, then it should go to welcome API. So when I go to the welcome API, there is a filter. Whenever a request comes to the /welcome, the filter will execute. What is that filter? Authentication filter. What that authentication filter is doing, it is checking the token. So client is sending the token or client is not sending the token. Client is not sending the token. So that's why what we got, missing authorization header. A exception is occurred. Boss, your request is invalid request. Token is not available. Whatever the welcome API you are trying to access through API gateway, as per API gateway configuration, for the welcome URL pattern, we have added a filter. That filter is checking for the header, request header with the authorization. Header is not available. That's why your request is not processed. The request is not processed. Are you clear with my point? Are you clear with my point? Why the request is not processed? Come on, guys. Why the request is not processed? Are you clear with my point? I am sending the request to 5555/welcome. Which microservice is running on the port number 5555?
Gateway, sir. Gateway.
Which microservice running on the port number 5555, guys?
API gateway.
Gateway.
API gateway is running on the port number 5555. So what is the routings we have configured in the API gateway? What is the routing we configured in the API gateway in order to secure our applications? When the request comes to /welcome, then it should go to welcome API. It should go to welcome API. Will it go to welcome API directly or it will not go to welcome API directly? Whenever request comes to the /welcome, I'm telling to API gateway to send the request to the welcome API. So the request will go to welcome API directly or the request will not go to the welcome API directly as per our configuration.
No, sir, it's not going to that.
As per our
It's not.
configuration, the request will go to the welcome API directly or the request will not go to the welcome API directly. Come on.
Will not do, sir.
Why the request is now? What is the configuration here in the API gateway? Whenever the request comes to the /welcome, it should go to the welcome API. So the request should be routed to the welcome API. So when I send the request to the /welcome API gateway /welcome, the request is routed to the welcome API. The request is not routed to the welcome API. The request is not routed to the welcome API. Why the request is not routed to the welcome API? Because of the filter. So in the API gateway properties file, I specified boss, whenever the request comes to the welcome API, you execute a filter.
Authentication filter.
Authentication filter is going to validate the token is available or not. If the token is valid, then only the request will be processed. If the token is not valid, I'm throwing a exception. I'm throwing a exception if the token is not valid. So token is not sending. The token we are not sending in the request header. That's why it is failed. So where the token is validating now? Token validation is happening at our backend microservices or a token is validating at the API gateway.
API gateway, sir. API gateway.
Guys, please respond. It's very important topic. Nobody is responding. I'm not getting interest if you are not responding.
API gateway level, sir. API gateway level.
The request is coming to /welcome. So as per the configuration in the API gateway routings, whenever the URL pattern is a /welcome, the request should go to the welcome API. So the request is routing to the welcome API directly. The request is not routing to the welcome API directly.
Not routing directly.
Not routing to the welcome API. Why it is not routing to the welcome API?
Due to
Because
authentication filter.
I have added a filter for the welcome API. So I'm telling that whenever a request comes to the welcome API, for this welcome API, I have configured a filter called auth filter. I configured a filter called auth filter. So whenever a request comes to the welcome API, my authentication filter will be executed. What is the role of the authentication filter in this API gateway? The authentication filter is responsible to validate the token. If the token is valid, then only the request will be forwarded to the welcome API. Similarly, let us go to greet method. Localhost /greet is available. Send the request to the greet. When I send the request to the greet, am I able to access the greet or I'm not able to access the greet?
Not able to, sir.
Not able to access the greet also. Why we are not able to access the greet? Again, for the greet API also we have added a filter. Again, for the greet API also we added a filter. If the request is /greet, it should go to greet API. It should go to greet API. For the greet API also, I have given a filter. Auth filter is added for this. Auth filter is added. So what is the role of the auth filter? It will validate the token is present or not. If the token is present, then only it will process. Otherwise, it will not process. Okay, that is fine. Next one, there is another URL called auth URL / register is available. Now, if you see in our configuration for the authentication API, the filter is available, the filter is not available. For auth API, filter is available, filter is not available.
Not available, sir.
Filter is not available. Filter is not available when we go for authentication because anybody can access the authentication URL pattern. So user can register, user can log in, then that is possible. /auth/**. What is the meaning of auth/**? What is the meaning of /auth*// guys? What is the meaning of this?
Any request, sir. /auth/ any request, any URI.
Any request. So here I have the URLs like register URL available. I have token URL is available. So in the authentication API, /auth/register /auth/token to get the token. Okay. And I am having /auth/validate. So whenever a request comes to any of this URL pattern, I want to process. I don't want to secure them. So whenever a request comes with /auth/**, then I want to process the request by using auth API. No need of any filter. No need of any filter. So that means if anybody is accessing authentication API, that request will be processed directly. No need of validating the token. So these URLs are not secured. /auth register, /auth token, /auth validate, those are not secured. Anybody can register, anybody can log in, and they can access our application. For these URL patterns, filters should not execute. So that's the reason in the API gateway routings, for authentication API URL patterns, no need of filter. Directly the request will be routed to authentication API. But when the request comes to /welcome/greet, then my filter will be executed, which is used to validate the request. If the request having a token, if the token is valid, then only the request will be processed. Otherwise, the request will not be processed. That is the flow. Microservices security with the JWT. Yesterday we have implemented the coding, whatever the registration, login, auth API logic we implemented yesterday. But what we have done in the yesterday session, everything we have implemented in the single project like a monolithic application. Token generation, token validation, filter, database, everything is there in one project. That is single monolithic application security. Suppose when we are going for the microservices, how the security will happen? In this way. Auth service will be available which contains the registration and login. When user register, record will go to database. When user login, then token will be generated, token will send to the client. The auth API methods are not secured, anybody can access. So where we are configuring the routing? In the API gateway. Any URL which is coming with /auth, then directly forward the request to auth API. No need of security. But welcome greet, these URLs are secured. When a request comes to the welcome API, you execute auth filter. Auth filter will validate the token. If token is valid, then only request will be forwarded. Whenever a request comes to the greet API, execute the auth filter, check the token. If token is available, then only process. If token is not available, don't process. Are you able to follow me? How to secure microservices?
Yes, sir.
How to secure microservices with the JWT?
Yes, sir.
Securing
Yes.
monolithic application with the JWT, securing microservices with the JWT. You got the concept now.
So what about if you use after /auth/something and then /something else? Will that also
Anything,
be?
sir. For auth, if you are URL starting with auth, after that ** means anything, then it is not secured. Authentication service only for the registration of user and login of the user. That's it. We don't write other functionality in that.
Okay, sir.
You got my point?
Yes, sir.
Anybody having any questions on this? Anybody having any questions on this microservices security with the JWT?
How it maintains the token, sir, the API gateway, because all these URLs are independent.
Token is expired or not, we are going to validate. Whenever the token is generated, in that token, whenever we go for auth token will generated by the API, I mean authentication API will generate the token, and in every request they will send the token. So whenever the token is sent, in the API gateway authentication filter is available. The authentication filter will check token is present or not. If the token is present, validate token method is available. In the validate token, we are going to see the keys, secret key is matching or not. And next one, whatever the secret we have generated, when at the time of generating the token, whatever the secret we are using, same secret we will use, and we will verify token matching with that secret or not. And the token is expired or not, we can verify. If both are satisfied, it is valid, otherwise it is invalid.
And in the register API, we are giving back the token ID, sir. That's why we can, for the subsequent message URLs, we can use this token. Okay.
Correct. So in the JWT service, here we are using one secret, right, which is used to generate the token. We are using one secret which is used to generate the token. So the same secret we are using in the API gateway to validate the token. If the token matching with the secret, then it is valid. If it is not matching with the secret, then it is invalid. Look at this diagram. Observe for 2 minutes, guys. Which service is secured, which service is not secured. We are deciding in the API gateway routings configuration. All of you, please observe this diagram for 2 minutes. In the interview, this is damn sure question. Can you explain how to secure microservices by using JWT? Coding we have done yesterday. Today is only configuration. For which microservices filter is required? For which microservices filter is not required?
Sir, one query from API gateway filter, how it is calling a authenticate API and how it is passing the credential for first time login.
You will send a post request to the API gateway with the data, then your request will be redirected to the authentication API directly. So here, this is the configuration. Whenever you send a request to the auth, whatever the request, whether it is a get or post, that request will be forwarded to authentication service. In the authentication service, we are having a post request method, which is register method, which is expecting user credentials data in the request body, name, email, password.
Okay, so first authentication service will get execute from the gateway and then like post to that same token is passed.
First request will come to API gateway. API gateway will check the URL pattern. It is /auth/register. Forward the request to auth API. Auth API register method will execute, will insert the record into database.
Right. What about the subsequent API? Like now, let's say I directly call a greet API.
So,
Okay.
so as of now, we can access directly because there is no need of security implemented in the real time. Those APIs will be deployed in the private network. We can't access them directly.
So even like in private, like let's say I want to call a greet API, right? So after that, how does it first call auth API to make sure like the call that I'm getting from the greet API is like the person who is calling?
Whenever we are deploying these projects in the real production environment, this greet API will be deployed in a private network. This URL will not be exposed for outside. So you don't know the URL of the greet API and welcome API directly. The only URL they will give you is the API gateway. If you want to access any microservice, you need to send the request to API gateway only. You will not get the URLs of these APIs.
Okay. Now, let's say we send it to API gateway URL, right? And that is a /welcome, right?
Yes.
From there, how does it call a authenticate API first? And then like in /welcome, I do not see like I'm passing any credential, right? Or do we need to pass the credential as well?
I did not get your question.
If there is a URL, API gateway URL containing /welcome, okay? So are we passing the credential along with it when I'm calling it?
You need to send the token in the request header, not credentials. Credentials you will send for at the time of authentication API access. To get the token, you will pass the credentials.
Okay.
Once you got the token, you will pass only token, not the credentials.
Okay. Understood.
Yeah. Now, let me register the user once. Let me go to the table, show tables. User credential table is available. Select star from user credentials. Currently, there is no record is available. Now go to post request /auth/register. I want to send a request to the registration API. No need of any token. Direct JSON data I am sending. I will send the name, email, and password. I'm giving my name. I'm giving my email. And I'm giving my password. Okay, ABC@123, something like this. Now I'm sending a post request to the auth API, guys. Click on send. The registration should be successful. Now you see the registration is successful. I got the 200. I'm not passing any token because auth API does not require any token. The user registration is successful. Okay. Now go to this one. Start from user credentials. The user record is inserted in the database table. Username Ashok. Password is encrypted. Okay. What is the password I have given? ABC@123. Now I want to log into the system. For this, I will go for /auth/token. That is the URL pattern. So for this also, I'm not passing any token. Anybody can log in. So this is the URL pattern. Click on send. If my credentials are valid, then login valid, no. Ashok gmail.com password correctly I have given. token is not generated. It is saying login is valid. It is saying invalid login. It should be valid login, right? Auth token, authentication, username and password. Oh, sorry. I should send the username, not email ID, guys. I'm using name for validation, not the email ID. Okay, it is validated with the name, not with the email. Okay, name and password I'm sending. Username and password I'm sending. Username authentication request is expecting username. Okay, username and password. When I send the request with username and password, then my token is generated. My login is valid. Yes, I got the token. Now, if you see, I accessed auth register, auth token with email ID and password. I'm able to access the details. I got my token. Now let us take this token and let me send a GET request to the welcome URL. Okay, when I access the welcome URL directly without a token, I'm saying authorization header is missing. Now go here and pass the bearer token, which is required for the welcome API. Click on send. Yes, welcome to Ashok IT. I'm able to access it. So for authentication, registration, login, directly we are able to send the request by using API gateway. No need of any token. So once my login is successful, I got the token. With that token, I'm sending a request to the welcome method. I'm able to access. Send the request for the greet method also. And see this greet API also I'm able to access because I'm sending the token. For example, if I don't send any token and if I try to access greet API, I am not able to access. If I access by using token, then I'm getting the response. Microservices are secure. Able to understand how to secure microservices by using JWT?
Yes, sir.
Any questions, anyone?
No, sir.
All good. So with this, we understood what is the Spring Security and how to secure our applications by using this. So microservices security, auth service contains the functionality for the user registration and user login with MySQL database. When user register, then user record will be inserted into DB table. When user login successfully, then it will generate JWT token and send to user as a response. Okay. Then we are having API gateway application, guys. So API gateway contains the logic to validate the token using filter. Okay. So in the API gateway, we have added routings for the microservices along with the filter. When the request comes to the /welcome, then it will go to the filter. Then auth filter will be executed. Once the filter validated the request, then it will go to welcome API. Similarly, when we get the request for the greet API, then the request will go to auth filter, then it will forward the request to greet API if the token is valid. When we get the request with the authentication API, then directly it will go to auth API without filter. These are the routings we have added in the API gateway. So when a request comes with welcome, when a request comes with /welcome, it will go to auth filter, it will validate. If it is valid, then it will route the request to welcome API. If the token is not valid, it will not route the request to welcome API. Similarly, when the request comes to the greet URL, it will go to the filter, validate the token. If it is valid, go to greet API. If the request comes with a /auth double star, then no need of filter, directly it will go to auth API. Okay. Perfect. So with this, we completed our discussion related to Spring Security. So as part of this Spring Security, what we have learned, guys? As part of this Spring Security, what we have learned? Yes, as part of this Spring Security, we discussed about what is Spring Security. We learned what is the Spring Security, what is authentication and authorization, what is authentication and authorization, and we discussed about basic authentication. We discussed about basic authentication. Okay, and we discussed about in-memory authentication. In-memory authentication, and we discussed about user details service in the Spring Boot. User detail service, which is used to load the user record based on the username or email ID. User detail service we implemented. Login and registration by customizing Spring Security with the filter chain. Customizing, securing specific URLs. Securing specific URLs with the customization. Okay. So if there are 10 URLs available, for all the 10 URLs, security is not required. We are going to secure specific URLs with the customization. Then next one, we implemented login and registration with the Spring Security. Login and registration with the Spring Security. Okay, and we implemented OAuth security, Spring Boot with JWT integration. Spring Boot with JWT integration we have implemented, and microservices security. Today we demonstrated microservices security with the JWT. Microservices security with the JWT, and we discussed Spring Boot with OAuth. Spring Boot with OAuth 2.0 we have integrated with the GitHub login. So if you want to access our microservice or any REST API, if you have the GitHub account, then if you log in with the GitHub, then you can access our microservice. So Spring Boot with OAuth, Spring Boot with JWT, microservices security with JWT at API gateway level we have implemented. Routings and filters we implemented in the API gateway. So with this, we completed our discussion related to Spring Security, guys. Good. Next. So with this, almost we are done with our syllabus, guys. And now let me know, is there any pending topic apart from tools? Is there any pending thing that I need to discuss? Apart from tools, is there anything pending that I need to discuss?
JUnit.
JUnit is a tool. Apart from tools, I'm saying. JUnit, Docker,
Sir,
Jenkins, these are three tools.
Sir, will you talk on SSL TLS as well sometime, like 15 minutes or so?
SSL certification, I need to see, sir, whether I can integrate that certificate or not, because I have never done in the local. I need to research on that first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Deployment, sir.
So, sir, Spring Boot with the procedure.
Calling a storage procedure with the Spring Boot.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you can do that, sir. Already we discussed about the custom query, right? For example, you have a procedure in the database. So for example, the procedure name is like this. Okay. You have a procedure. The procedure name is something like get products. That is your procedure. So if you want to call that procedure, then in the Spring Boot, what you need to do is you need to write one custom query. @query, then you will write that query name is equal to get procedure, get products you can execute, and call proc. There is an annotation call proc annotation available. Or else simply, let me go to ChatGPT. Calling storage procedure by using data.jpa. Just one annotation we need to specify for that. Call storage procedure using data.jpa. This is your entity class. Yes. This is the @query. Call your stored procedure. What are the parameters that you want to pass for that? So like this, you can call your stored procedure. Okay, this is one approach to call the stored procedure, and this is another approach to call the stored procedure. If you want to use data JPA directly by using @query annotation, call your procedure name, what are the parameters you want to supply. For that, you can give native query is equal to true. So with this line of code, you can call your stored procedure. That's not a big deal.
What about Spring transaction?
Sorry?
Spring transaction.
Spring transaction. In the data JPA, whatever the transaction we are handling, that we can specify @transactional annotation. So when you want to roll back, by default in the Spring Boot data JPA, you no need to commit any transaction because we are using predefined methods. Save method, delete method. For these methods, predefined methods are available. Save, delete operations. Only for non-select operations, transactions are required. For select operations, transactions are not required. For non-select operations, directly predefined methods we are using. Save method, update method is not there. Save all, delete by ID, delete all. Whenever you call those predefined methods, transaction will be committed automatically. Suppose if you want to roll back the transaction, then you need to use one annotation @transactional rollback for exception.class. Whenever some exception occurred, I want to roll back the transaction. This one annotation we will use to roll back the transaction.
For the predefined
And
methods
how to handle distributed transactions in our microservices. To handle the distributed transactions in the microservices, Saga design pattern we are going to implement. I have shared the videos for the Saga design pattern. 2 videos available. If you know Kafka, then Kafka is basically used as a streaming platform. When we are dealing with distributed transactions, then Saga design pattern we are going to implement. For the Saga design pattern, I have shared the video in our WhatsApp group already. So I want all of you to go through that Saga design pattern video once to understand how we are going to handle distributed transactions in our microservices.
It's rollback
What
exception
about
for the
aspect-oriented programming, sir? It's not a separate thing.
Sorry?
Aspect-oriented programming, AOP.
Sir, AOP is basically which is used to separate secondary logic in our application. So if you remember, we implemented exception handling in our application. Exception handling we are writing in our classes, or exception handling we are writing in a separate class, global exception handler. Basically, AOP is used to separate secondary logics from the primary logic. So whatever that global controller advice we have used, that is the AOP concept only. Controller advice we implemented na, that comes under AOP, which is used to separate primary logics and secondary logics in our application. Instead of handling the exceptions in all the classes in our application, we have created one global exception handler, which is used to handle the exceptions in our entire application. That comes under aspect-oriented programming.
Sir, this @transactional rollback, this is for the predefined method, sir.
This is the annotation, sir. You can use this annotation at any method.
No, sir. Suppose if the predefined method automatic transactions are happening, now suppose anything comes, some exception, then it will be rollback, sir. In that case, we need to use
any type of exception which occurs, then it is going to roll back. If the exception is occurred, then only it will be rolled back. If the exception is not occurred, then it will not roll back. Tomorrow I will show you one example on this.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Yeah.
How to send a messages in WhatsApp, sir?
Sorry?
How to send a messages in WhatsApp, sir? And we can send a Gmail messages now. How can you send a message in WhatsApp, sir?
How to send a message to the WhatsApp number. If you want to send a message to the WhatsApp, you need to have the WhatsApp Business API license. So by using REST template, so here already I conducted one weekend workshop. I think so. Do you guys attended that? Let me check when that workshop is conducted. 3 months back, I conducted one workshop, OTP sending by using Spring Boot with WhatsApp. WhatsApp integration with this one. Basically, WhatsApp people will give you one API. that API you need to call by using REST template or web client. You need to have the business license for that. So if you have the business license, then you can send the request to that one by using this Spring Boot. Yeah. So this is the post for entity method. What API we are going to call, and we are sending that token, bearer token we are sending. With the token, we can send the message. I will share this video once. Please go through this. Sending a WhatsApp message by using WhatsApp business API with the Spring Boot.
Okay, same process in the text message also, sir.
Sorry?
Same process in the text message, sir.
Yeah. Anything, OTP or text message, any kind of message you can send by using this WhatsApp business API.
So by tomorrow, Spring Boot class is over, sir.
Tomorrow I will explain how to roll back the transaction by using data JP. One example we will discuss on this transaction part. How to do the transaction propagation, transaction levels, those things we'll discuss in the tomorrow session. Then we are done with our Spring Boot. The tools are pending. JUnit tool that I need to explain, and Docker tool is available, and Jenkins deployment already videos are there. If anybody want to go through them, yes, you can go, or else weekend workshops I will conduct for the pending tools. Okay, good.
Sir, can you tell me like how to integrate SOAP with Spring Boot from the starting day I was asking you.
Spring Boot with SOAP integration. SOAP example.
Yeah.
Sure, sir. Because
Yes.
Long back I have worked with the SOAP. First I need to try once and I can explain. I forgot the SOAP web service.
Yeah, actually I have done it also with the XSD. I have done it. It is working, but already we have one like a very old project. So for that already the beans are there, Pojo classes.
Okay.
So from the Pojo classes we have to get the SOAP. So there I'm little struggling. So can you please help me?
Sure, sir. We'll connect on that and we'll discuss, because it's been 4-5 years I have not worked on the SOAP web services. So I need to research on this first, then I can explain. Immediately I can't do that. I need 1 or 2 days of time. First I need to learn that first, because I forgot that.
Okay. So when can I expect, sir?
We'll connect over this weekend and we'll both connect and we'll see how to solve that problem.
Sure. And after once the class is also got over, so can we attend those workshop or?
Yeah, you can attend the workshop, sir. I will give the updates. You will be getting the updates in our WhatsApp channel, and whenever the tools are conducted, I will inform you and you guys can attend that workshop.
Okay, and one last thing, like
Jenkins tools are pending for us. Okay, so JUnit mostly tomorrow we'll discuss on the transaction part. Then Friday I will explain that to JUnit. Okay, so Docker class actually I'm starting today evening at 6 p.m. for the DevOps people for 2 to 3 days. If you want to learn about the Docker, then you can attend the live class. If 6 p.m. if your guys are not able to attend, my Docker videos already I have shared in our WhatsApp group. So if you want to learn the Docker, today evening from 6 p.m. onwards, I'm starting the Docker session for the DevOps people. Okay, so if you don't have the time constraint, then you can join for that Docker class at 6 p.m. today. I will share the Zoom link in our WhatsApp group. Is that okay?
Docker class, how many sessions taking, sir?
Sorry?
Docker, how many sessions, sir?
Sorry, sir, your voice is not clear.
Sir, Docker class, how many days taking, sir?
I have shared 2 videos in our WhatsApp group. I have explained Docker at the developer level in those videos. If you want to know more in depth about the Docker at the DevOps level, then for the DevOps people, we will teach Docker for 1 week. For developers, we will teach for only 1 or 2 days of time.
Okay, sir. Yesterday I attended the interview, sir. I got more than 6 questions of the Docker, sir.
Okay, so today evening you can attend at 6 p.m.
Okay.
I'm sharing the Docker link in the WhatsApp group, guys. So all of you okay for 6 p.m. Docker class?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
No, sir. The time we have our stand-up meeting and all, so we can't attend. It's my working time.
Can you go through the video?
Yeah. Is it possible? Like, can you ask your admin team to share with us?
Yes, sir. I will ask that. I will upload in the YouTube only directly.
Okay. Yeah, great.
Okay, so today evening we'll start with the Docker session, guys, and tomorrow morning we'll work on that transaction part in the JPA. And JUnit also I will try to complete in this week only. Okay, so tomorrow and day after tomorrow, we are going to finish our syllabus. Then
Sir, one last question. See, after a course, if you got stuck or if you have any doubts, to whom to contact?
Our WhatsApp group is available. You can post in the group.
Okay. Yeah.
Group will not be deleted. Group will be available for your clarifications.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So the notes will you make available? I make sure like all the notes are properly uploaded, like no missing notes, because one single day note missing note could lead us to stuck somewhere.
Sure, sir. I think already everything is updated. Anything is missing?
We are randomly we are checking, but just wanted to inform you. Like
No, sir. As of now, whatever is there in my system, everything is updated. Today's notes also I have already updated.
already, yeah. Thank you, sir.
So whatever the tools we have covered and whatever the topics we have covered in the microservices and Spring Boot, how many years of experience can we mention in the interview?
3 to 4 years experience you can mention.
Along with Kafka and all?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir.
Sir, how to build
As a developer level, what I will do in the company related to Kafka Redis, I have explained that. Kafka administration will be available that developers won't do. I will also not do that in my company.
Okay. So we can 2+ we can mention, right, sir?
Yes.
Okay.
How to build a resume, sir? You can teach us.
Resume building, yes, sir. I will take a class for that. So for both JRTP and Spring Boot, I will take a combined session for resume preparation.
Okay.
Sir, when are you going to new GRTP batch, sir? New GRTP?
will start from November first week, sir. Actually, from 21st October, again, new Spring Boot batch is starting at 9:30. Mostly from 30th of October or 31st of October, new JRTP batch will start at morning 7:30 a.m.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
You got my point?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, good, guys. Thank you. Thank you, guys. So with this, I'm stopping.
Excuse me, sir.
Please
Hello?
practice this security JWT with microservices, which is very, very, very important. We'll see you tomorrow.